It's so much fun watching Peppa Pig, but spotting animation mistakes in the episodes is even more fun. So, in today's video, we're going to share some of the mistakes that we've found in Peppa Pig. Like, in the episode Dressing Up, Peppa and George find the old clothes of Mummy and Daddy Pig. So, they decide to wear the dress and pretend to be their parents. Later in the episode, we can notice that Peppa and George's clothes are all muddy, and also Peppa is wearing lipstick. But the mistake is, right when Peppa Pig takes off her dress, we can notice that the lipstick also disappears. I don't think lipstick works like that. Now this next one is a continuity mistake. In the episode Lost Keys, Peppa and her family go on a trip to a mountain scenic spot. But on the way down, Daddy Pig loses the car keys down the drain. And to get the keys out from the drain, they decide to buy a fishing rod so that they can hook the keys out. So Mrs. Rabbit sells them a fishing rod, and Daddy Pig throws the fishing line in the drain. Unfortunately, the fishing line isn't long enough to reach the keys. Now, pay attention, because here comes the mistake. Mrs. Rabbit decides to throw a stone down the drain to check its depth. And as you can hear, when the stone reaches down the drain, it makes a splash sound, meaning there's water on the bottom. Later in the episode, Mr. Bull arrives on the scene with a crane, and he uses the crane to get the keys. But wait, look at the bottom, there's no trace of water. But earlier, when Mrs. Rabbit threw a stone, we heard a splash sound. But in this scene, there's no water there. It's a weird error, isn't it? If you're enjoying the video, then don't forget to hit the like button. Now this next mistake might be the funniest one yet. In the episode Rebecca Rabbit, Peppa and George visit Rebecca's house where they pretend to be rabbits to see how different Rebecca and her family are. Rebecca shows them how to be a rabbit. She also mentions how much rabbits like to eat carrots. Later in the episode, Mummy Rabbit calls them for lunch. Now look carefully, we can see that everyone has got 3 pieces of carrot on their plate. So far so good. But while everyone gets ready to eat, George refuses to eat anything. He hesitates until Daddy Rabbit points out how much a rabbit likes carrots. When the scene zooms onto George, look at Peppa's plate beside his. It's empty. But literally moments ago, there were 3 carrots on her plate. Unless she ate 3 carrots within a millisecond. This is an animation mistake. In the episode Horsey Twinkletoes, Peppa and George are excited because Mr. Zebra has delivered a package from Aunt Dottie, who lives abroad. When they bring in the package to the kitchen, we can notice that behind them is a cabinet which is relatively small. And also beside the cabinet there's a recycling bin. So far so good. But the mistake is, when Peppa is taking out the horse toy to play, we can notice that the cabinet behind her, all of a sudden, is longer than before. And not just that, the recycling bin that was beside the cabinet is now replaced by recycling boxes. In the episode Desert Island, Grampy Rabbit, Grandad Dog, and Grandpa Pig go fishing. And if we look at the boat, we can notice there's a flagpole, steering wheel, and a gear lever. But the mistake is, when they sail the boat and reach their destination, we can notice that the gear lever has disappeared. But earlier, it was right there. And that's not all. Later in the episode, the boat sinks, and all 3 grandpa get stuck on a deserted island. So, Daddy Dog comes to the rescue. When Daddy Dog is about to get on the boat, we can notice that the gear lever of his boat is on the edge, much farther from the steering wheel. But as soon as he gets on the boat, the gear lever has now shifted near the steering wheel. But wait, there's one more. Finally, when Daddy Dog and the kids find the granddads, the gear lever has now disappeared. Seriously, where do you even find boats like these? Now this next is not a mistake. Instead, it's a magic trick. In the episode Mr. Potato's Christmas Show, all the students of Peppa's playgroup gather in a theater to see Mr. Potato's live show. Notice that Peppa is sitting in the last row with some of her friends. And in the row, in front of Peppa's, we can see a brown cat. Now pay close attention because the mistake here is magical. Moments later, when Madame Gazelle says the show is about to start, the brown cat sitting in front of Peppa has now teleported all the way to the front row. And that's not all. Just as the show is about to start, Pedro Pony says he needs to go to the toilet. Now focus on these 2 characters sitting beside Freddy Fox. As soon as Pedro passes by the aisle to go to the toilet, the 2 seats are now empty. But seconds ago, they were occupied, talking about the brown cat again. After Pedro goes to the toilet, scene zooms onto Peppa, but look who's sitting in front of her, the same cat that was sitting in the front row. After Pedro returns from the toilet, the scene zooms out again, and of course the cat magically goes back to sit in the front row. Seriously, what kind of trickery is going on here? Moving on, in the episode Richard Rabbit Comes to Play, Peppa and George are playing in their room when Richard Rabbit arrives. Now let's look at the room here. As we can see, it's quite messy, and the toys are scattered everywhere, and the toy basket is empty. After George invites Richard Rabbit to play in his room, we can now notice that the room is less messy than before, and also the toy basket is now filled with toys. Now you might be thinking that Peppa probably cleaned up the room when George was gone, but that cannot be possible because Peppa was busy making the house with all these blocks. In the episode The Beach, the pig family goes to the beach for a fun day. When they arrive at the beach, Peppa starts taking out the toys from the basket. Notice that she takes out towels, buckets, spades, and the ball. But the mistake is, after Mummy Pig applies sunscreen to Peppa and George, if we look behind them, we can notice the bucket and the spades are now back in the basket. But earlier, we clearly saw Peppa taking out the toys. Going back to the episode, Richard Rabbit Comes to Play, when Susie Sheep enters the room. Right at this moment, if we look at the wall, we can notice there are two drawings. One is of an elephant and other of a fairy. But when the scene zooms out a bit, we can see that the drawings are now in a different position. Now, they are much higher on the wall than before, even higher than the bed. Moving on, in the episode Kylie Kangaroo and her family go to Peppa's house for a visit. When they are at the house, the entire pig family comes outside to greet them. Now look carefully at the pig family. We can notice that Peppa and George are standing right in front of Daddy and Mummy Pig. But the issue is, when the scene zooms in to Peppa and George, Mummy and Daddy Pig disappear from the frame. But earlier, we saw they were right behind Peppa and George. There's one more mistake in this episode, and it is even funnier. After Peppa and George meet Kylie Kangaroo and her brother Joey, Peppa shows Kylie how to jump up and down in muddy puddles. Now look at the size of Muddy Puddle, it's quite small. But when other characters start to jump in the puddle, the size of it magically changes. We can clearly see the puddle changing its size out of nowhere. Now this next mistake can be found in the episode Bouncy Ball. Here Peppa and her friends are playing football. And also, we can notice 4 trees with fruits on them. Now look closely, because seconds later, all the fruits from the trees disappear into thin air. But seconds later, when Rebecca Rabbit scores a goal, the fruits can be seen again. Seriously, what's up with these fruits? In the episode The Museum, Peppa goes to a museum with her family. She's exploring the museum and having a lot of fun. And in one of the scenes, where Peppa is looking at a crown on a shelf, we can see that in the background there's a plain purple wall behind her. But when it zooms to Peppa, we don't see the purple wall, but instead we see a glass cabinet. But in the scene earlier, it was just a purple wall behind her. So these were some of the mistakes we found in Peppa Pig. And as always, we'll see you all in the next video.